Mark Twain once told this story about taking a trip by train. He said he wasn't sure he wanted to carry his briefcase with him. So he asked the baggage handler if he thought the briefcase was strong enough to be checked in and placed in the baggage compartment. Well, the baggage handler took Mark Twain's case and he promptly threw it on the ground. And he said, "That, sir, is what it'll get in Philadelphia." And then the man picked it up and slammed it 5 or 6 times against the side of a train car. "And that," he said, "is what it'll get in Chicago." And finally he threw the case back on the ground, violently stomped on it again and again, and he said, "That's what it'll get in Sioux City." And then he nodded toward the now battered suitcase and he said, "And if you're going to go any further than Sioux City, sir, then I'd suggest you better carry it on yourself." Well, real or fictitious, it's another of Mark Twain's great stories. But I'm wondering, have we ever felt like that battered suitcase? The man we know as the Apostle Paul sure did. I mean, here was a person who offers us this self-description: afflicted in every way, perplexed, persecuted, struck down. Sounds like a living example of that pathetic suitcase. And yet at the same time, Paul also sounds remarkably upbeat and positive. He said, yeah, we are afflicted in every way, but we're not crushed. Yes, we're perplexed, but we're not driven to despair. Persecuted, sure, but not forsaken. Struck down, yes, but not destroyed. And you notice something there. There is not one note of self-pity. He seems to take his situation as a matter of course. Paul had this great mental attitude. There's no question about it. And as we learned in our scripture reading earlier this morning, he had experienced threats and shipwrecks and beatings, as well as enduring imprisonment and persecution. Most anybody else would have packed it in a long time before. They would have said, you know what? Yeah, maybe the Lord doesn't really want me to do this missionary stuff. So I think I need to figure out a career change here pretty quick. Probably how you and I would have responded to the kind of constant adversity that Paul had to face. Yet through his example, we see very clearly how our attitude and our beliefs really can determine our effectiveness in life. There's a story that's apparently quite true about a professional golfer who came out of South Africa, whose name was Bobby Cole. Now it seems, so the story goes, that nobody really liked to play with this guy because he always seemed to be so angry. He'd make constant cutting remarks and he always was bitter, and he had a way of making the other golfers around him feel frustrated and angry too. Now the story says that it seems during a warm-up round at the Masters in Augusta one year, this Bobby Cole got paired up with an aging Sam Snead. Now, everybody loves Sam Snead. Good old Sam. He was always gracious and kind when people sought him out. He coached others, encouraged others, rarely had a negative word to say to anybody. But after playing 10 or 12 holes with Bobby Cole, who apparently was being quite obnoxious, even Sam Snead's legendary patience was beginning to give out. They were approaching the next hole, and it had this dog-leg bend to it. Also some very tall pine trees right at the bend. Now, Snead took out a 3-iron, and playing it safe, he hit his ball right down the middle of the fairway. Obviously, he was planning to make his approach with a second shot. And then he turned to Bobby Cole and he said, you know, long ago, son, when I was your age and I had to play this hole, I'd take my driver. And in one long shot, I'd put it right over the tops of those pine trees. You know, that'd save me about 100 yards. But of course, that was me, and that same shot might be a little tough for you. Well, Bobby Cole's anger flashed immediately, and he said to Sam Snead, hey, I can do anything you've ever done. Get out of my way. And he put away his iron, and he took out his driver, and he hit what started out as a fabulous shot, but the ball hit the tops of those trees that he was trying to get over. And it ricocheted around 4 or 5 times up there in the branches. And finally, it fell to the ground a few feet from one of the trunks, and it bounced its way over into the rough, and it laid there like a shot quail. As both golfers walked toward their next shots, The older Sam Snead looked back at Bobby Cole and he said, "That was a nice try, son, but I forgot to mention, when I was your age and I made that shot, those trees were only 3 feet high." Bobby Cole's furious reply has forever been unrecorded. All of us can probably think of people we know, people who are gifted, highly intelligent, but they're defeated by their attitudes. Not the Apostle Paul. Oh, he could have given in to his difficult circumstances. Nobody would have ever blamed him, but he never did. There had been this great darkness in his heart before, but on the road to Damascus, this new light had shined into his life. It was the light of Jesus Christ. It was Paul's personal conversion experience, and he became through that a changed person, top to bottom and inside out, given a new perspective on life, one that allowed him to see how God's hand could be at work regardless of the obstacles he had to overcome. You know where so many of us go wrong? We compare ourselves to those people who we think have it made. You know, the golden people, the ones who cruise through life, never seem to have a single hair out of place. The people who are always pretty, always perfect, and always rich, or at least that seems to be the way they are. And we look at them and we make comparisons with them. And we say to ourselves, hey, this is the way it ought to be for me too. I ought to be able to live like that. I ought to be able to look like that too. And when life then does get a little bit haywire for us and we get tossed around like Mark Twain's briefcase, then we curse our fate and we lose ourselves in cynicism. Paul, on the other hand, was a realist. He knew that life at times could be terribly unfair. He knew that some people had to struggle mightily for no reason that ever made any sense. And knowing this and accepting this as being part and parcel of our human experience, that allowed Paul to handle some of life's most difficult moments. Now, you and I have been together through some of those moments right now, haven't we? We've walked through a scenario that none of us could have foreseen a few months ago. We're wearing masks. We're washing our hands all the time. We're staying at a distance from our family and friends. Jobs have changed radically, so have schools. We've tried to work and to learn from home now. In a lot of cases, our incomes and investments have taken a beating as employment statistics suffer setbacks. And some families have to temporarily rely on those small stimulus checks that were issued by the government. And we keep watching those dancing graphs of the viral infections, moving upwards in some places with a frightening speed. The COVID virus has literally affected every dimension of American life, and it appears that this is going to go on to be the case for the foreseeable future until some kind of vaccine is probably found. And all of this is happening amid long overdue cries for social justice. Cries that haven't been this loud or this pervasive since the 1960s. And despite having just celebrated our nation's birthday a week ago, we are an incredibly divided country in so many ways, racially, economically, ethnically, and especially politically. And amid all the concern and confusion, we hear ourselves saying, wait a minute, this isn't fair. I never planned on this. What's going on here? Who's in charge? What are we going to do? And so in very vivid and personal terms, we're all being reminded right now that life is not fair. Indeed, it's never been fair and it never will be fair. There's no insurance policy for anybody that's going to stand up against what life may bring us today, tomorrow, next week, next month. As Jesus himself once said in describing the human experience, it rains the same on the just and on the unjust. In life, both the deserving and the undeserving end up getting wet. Yeah, sometimes it rains to nourish our gardens and our flowers, and sometimes it rains on our picnics and our parades, too. And sometimes it rains so hard we've got rivers that overwhelm their dams, as we experienced here in mid-Michigan just 2 months ago. And you know what? Being good or bad, being holy or unholy, being right or wrong, It doesn't seem to have a whole lot to do with it. So Paul's experience in life, although extreme, maybe wasn't all that unique. Some of the most inspiring people in this world are people who have known great pain and despair and discouragement. They are the people who have learned to accept all this as part of the way that life can be at times. And many of them have learned to manage their setbacks, to actually use those setbacks to enhance their relationship with God and their connections with other people. See, Paul never regarded his problems as being aberrations. And in that way, he was always ready to meet whatever it was that life might serve up for him. He knew that life could indeed be hard, but his overriding concern was to somehow have faith in God no matter what. Yeah, we have this treasure in clay jars, he wrote, in order to show that the power belongs to God and not to us. I really do believe that the most content people on this earth are those people who sense they've got some kind of larger purpose, that they're put here for something beyond themselves, and then they try to live in God's light as they find that purpose and as they try to fulfill it. Sometimes the secret of having a great attitude lies in getting out of ourselves and getting into our God. That's what a woman named Sarah Flower Adams did. Now, Sarah lived 170 years ago, and she studied hard to be an actress at first. And actually, she was quite successful. She got rave reviews. But at the very peak of her tremendous success, she was suddenly stricken by some mysterious, debilitating disease, and it left her for the rest of her life as an invalid. Now, she knew she could never return to the stage, and at first that disappointment was overwhelming, because this had literally been her whole life. But then over time, she began to seek some solace in her Bible. And this led her to begin to start to write religious poems for various publications. And at one point, she felt as though her invalid status was actually heightening her sense of the presence of God. And so she felt inspired to write a poem on this subject. Now, the poem she wrote eventually became a hymn, and it went like this: Nearer, my God, to thee, nearer to thee. Even though it be a cross that raiseth me, still all my song shall be, nearer, my God, to thee, nearer to thee. Through the years since then, this hymn, Nearer, my God, to thee, has provided comfort and encouragement to an untold number of people. When President William McKinley lay on his deathbed after being shot by an assassin, he whispered the words of this beloved hymn. Survivors from the sinking of the Titanic reported that the ship's orchestra played this hymn while people prepared and prayed their way to either life or death in the cold waters of the North Atlantic. During the hard days of the Alaskan gold rush, a small band of Salvation Army volunteers headed north, and they set up a camp there in one of the most lawless and violent of those northern boom towns. On one afternoon, this small group of believers gathered by the side of a river, and they began singing together, Nearer, my God, to thee. And slowly, various miners began to join them in their singing. One by one, then two by two, then in small groups they gathered, until 25,000 men were singing along. Sarah Flower Adams, this frail invalid, regained her attitude. She was able to see things through a new perspective, and in turn, she blessed millions of people for over 170 years by losing herself in God. And that, you see, ultimately is also our need. We need to get out of ourselves and get more into our God. And then when life treats us like a battered briefcase, perhaps especially when life treats us like a battered briefcase, we will have hope and we will endure. We have this treasure in clay pots, Paul said. Why? To show that the power begins to God, and that power belongs to God, and not in us or with us or to us. Amen.